Alright, so I'm recording a voiceover for KillTeam by Gav Thorpe. I'm just doing the first chapter right now, but I'll shut up and let you enjoy. The air was filled with swirling gray dust, whipped up into a storm by a wind that shrieked across the hard black granite of the tower. The black edifice soared into the turbulent skies, windowless but studded with hundreds of blazing lights, whose yellow beams were swallowed quickly by the dust storm. For 300 meters, the tower climbed into the raging skies of Govul's third moon, an almost perfect cylinder of unbroken and unforgiving rock, hewn from the infertile mesa on which the Gulag stood. A narrow-beamed red laser sprang into life from its summit, penetrating the gloom of the cloud-shrouded night. A moment later, it was answered by a triangle of white glares as the shuttle descended towards the landing pad. In the bathing glow of the landing lights, technicians scurried back and forth across the pad, protected against the violent climate with bulky work suits made from a fine metal mesh, their hands covered with heavy gloves, thick-soled boots upon their feet. With a whine of engines cutting back, the shuttle's 3 feet touched down with a loud clang on the metal decking of the landing area. A moment later, a portal on the side swung open, and a docking ramp jerkily extended itself on hissing hydraulics to meet with the hatchway. A tall figure ducked through the low opening and stepped out onto the walkway. He stood there for a moment, his heavy dress coat whipping around him, a gloved hand clamping the officer's cap to his head, with his back as straight as a rod despite the horrendous conditions. The new arrival strode across the docking gantry with a purposeful gait, never once breaking his gaze from directly ahead of him. Inside, a black-clad guard saluted the man and without a word gestured for him to proceed into the open-work iron elevator just inside the landing pad building. With a creak of rusty hinges, the warden swung the door shut and jerked a lever to start the conveyance, descending with a rattling of chains and grinding of gears. "Which level is the prisoner on?" the officer asked, speaking for the first time since his arrival. His voice was deep and quiet, the authoritative tone of a man used to being obeyed without question. "Level 16, sir," the guard replied, not meeting the piercing blue gaze of the officer. "One of the isolation floors," he added hesitantly. The visitor did not reply, but merely nodded. The lift rattled on for a couple of minutes, passing slowly down through floor after floor, an illuminated dial marking their descent. When it reached 17, the guard hauled back on the lever, and a moment later the shaft echoed with a screech of badly oiled brakes. The elevator shuddered to a halt a few seconds later. The officer glanced up at the floor indicator, which now was shining through number 16. The tech priest promised to look at it, sir, but they say they are too busy." The warden answered apologetically at the officer's questioning glance. The prison guard was old and haggard, with thinning tobacco-stained white hair and ill-fitting uniform. Coughing self-consciously, the guard flung open the doors with more screeching and stepped out of the way. The level onto which the tall man stepped was as round as the tower itself. Heavy armored doors spaced evenly around its walls. Everything was the color of aging whitewash, a pale gray, stained in places with patches of reddish brown. "It's this one, sir," walking around to the right of the elevator door when he realized the officer was waiting for direction. Another guard, younger and sturdier than the one who has been waiting at the landing pad, was standing by one of the doors, dressed in the same plain black uniform, a heavy cudgel hanging from his belt. The first guard led the officer over to the door and flipped down a small viewing window. The smell of stale sweat swept out of the small grill, but the officer's face remained impassive as he gazed through the narrow slit. Inside, the cell was as bare as the hall outside, painted in the same drab color, only a few meters square. The room was illuminated by a single glow globe set into the ceiling behind a wire mesh. Its lackluster yellow light cast a jaundiced tinge across the room's occupant. He was stretched out on the far wall, wrist manacled to the corners of the ceiling with heavy link chains. His feet were similarly restrained to the floor. His head hung down against his chest, his features hidden by a long, bedraggled mane of unkempt hair. He was clad in nothing but a rag about his waist, the dim light showing up his taut, sinewy muscles. His chest was crisscrossed with scars, some new, others old. His arms were similarly disfigured, a particularly prominent slash across his upper right arm obscuring what was left of a tattoo. His left thigh was marked on both sides by large puncture scars from a wound that had obviously passed completely through his leg. "Why was he moved here?" the officer asked quietly, his voice causing the prisoner to stir slightly. "In the first months he was here, he killed 7 wardens and 5 other prisoners and almost escaped, sir," the older guard explained, casting a nervous glance through the slit and exchanging a look with the other guard. "The commandant has had him confined to isolation for the last 5 months for the safety of the other inmates and the guards, sir." The officer nodded, and for a fleeting second the warden thought he saw what looked like a satisfied smile pass across his lips. "And his mental condition?" the man asked, moving his gaze from the warden back into the cell. "The chirurgeon has examined him twice and has declared him psychopathic, sir," the guard replied after a moment. "He seems to hate everyone. He refuses to eat anything except protein gruel. The only time he allows us near him is when we take him down to the exercise hall. We can't allow him in there with other prisoners, though, and no one is allowed to carry anything that might be turned into a weapon in his presence. We learned that when he tried to escape." The officer turned back, an eyebrow raised in query. "Nobody thought to count the spoons in the mess hall," the warden replied, ashen-faced. The man turned his attention back to the cell once more. "Perfect," he whispered to himself. "Open the door," he ordered the younger of the 2 guards before stepping back into one side. As the sullen, dark-haired warden did as he was told, the door screeched open. The prisoner looked up for the first time. Like the rest of his body, his face was a mass of scars. A long beard hung down over his chest. The warden's look was returned by a venomous stare, hatred burning in the dark eyes of the inmate, a feral intensity shining in them. The second guard took up position on the other side of the prisoner, dragging his heavy club free and holding it easily in his right hand. "Now, the manacles," the officer prompted. "I don't think that's a good idea, sir," the aging guard replied with a startled look. The prisoner's eyes hadn't moved, continuing to burn straight through the warden. "Sir?" the young officer replied officially with a horrified stare. "Did you hear what he told you about this animal?" "He is not an animal," the officer snapped back. "The manacles." Visibly shaking, the white-haired warden crept forward and fumbled with his key of rings. The other guard followed him, dragging his cudgel free from his belt. Hesitantly, the crouching guard unlocked the left leg first, flinching nervously, expecting the foot to lash out at him. A bit more confident, he unlocked the other leg. He glanced up at the prisoner's face, but the inmate's gaze had not left the face of the other security man. Quickly, he undid the wrist locks and took a few hurried steps back, ready to bolt. The prisoner took a step forward, rubbing his arms to revive the circulation. Then, without a word, the inmate stepped to his left, his right hand lashing out, sending them all spinning from the younger warden's grasp, who yelped and clutched his broken wrist. The other guard stepped forward, but the prisoner was quicker, twisting on his heels to deliver a spinning kick to his midriff, hurling him back against the wall with a thud and a hoarse cry of pain. The guard with the mangled wrist had it recovered, but the prisoner turned his attention back to him, smashing rigid fingers into his throat, then wrapping his arm around the guard's neck in a headlock. There was an audible crack as the guard's neck snapped, and the prisoner gave a satisfied grunt as he let the body slump to the ground. He took a step forward towards the surviving warden and was about to repeat the move when the officer stepped into the room. "That is enough, I think," the visitor said quietly, and the prisoner looked around, a wolfish grin of savage joy splitting his scarred face. "I'm fragging happy to see you, Colonel. Do you need me again?" "Yes, I need you again, Cage." Alright, so that was the first chapter of Kill Team by Gav Thorpe. It's a really old, or I don't know how old it is, but it's one of the first Games Workshop novels I read. And it's about a penal legion, I believe. It's been a while since I read it, but they encounter a Tau power suit, and the encounter with that is super interesting to me personally. I thought it was super fun, and when I get to it, it'll be very fun. There's no set date for when I get to it right now. I'm just doing this for fun, so yeah, hope you enjoyed. Bye.